you gonna play now?
Bobby, I don't know. But whatsoever I play, it's got to be funky. 1, 2, 3. Funky, funky.
Funky cold.
Funky stuff.
Funky. Funky.
Wicked funky. Can't get enough. I tried. Oh, that funky stuff. Say, whoa, 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 yeah.
Funky Politics Education Reform Series is presented by the National Civil Rights Museum, sponsored by Memphis Education Fund and Southwest Tennessee Community College. We'd like to thank our media partner, Chalkbeat Tennessee.
This is Terry Freeman,
Jim Strickland,
Dorsey Hobson.
I'm DeAndre Brown.
Melissa Haushalter,
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics Show.
Funky Politics,
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Y'all better keep listening.
Funky Politics, part of the Katsukian Network.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Katsukian Network. You got your guy here, DC, Doc Ward, and of course we got a very special guest host sitting in with us this evening, Wendy Thomas, independent journalist, world-renowned journalist. I might add that. Doc Ward, what do you think?
I think we're privileged today.
We're privileged?
Today.
Hello, Wendy. How are you today?
I'm good. I think the honor is all mine.
Well, Thank you very much.
Yes, you're most welcome. I'm just modest like that. You know, we're visiting today with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele, a education reform guru that's known around the country, does a lot of speaking, a lot of seminars, a lot of consulting work around the nation in terms of how do we address and assist underperforming districts and local schools. And Principal Kafele, welcome to the program, sir.
Yes, sir. Good to be here.
Hey, great having you. Yeah, I want to just jump right into this thing. My question is, seeing that we have just elected a new president, and of course ESSA is on the front burner now, and Race to the Top and No Child Left Behind are now in our rearview mirror. Where do you see, from a national perspective, do you see school choice, or I would say in terms of portability, the voucher system, do you see that coming into play a lot more now, just in your opinion, with the president-elect and his new designee to be Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos?
Yeah, I do. When you look at the new designee, Secretary of Education, looking at her background and looking at her interests and her loyalties, I think public education is going to take a big hit.
Wow.
In what way, I don't know, but just kind of her being on that team now and where her interests lie, we're all going to be watching.
Oh, great! Wow.
So what are you going to be watching for?
Going to be watching in terms of to what extent public education is a priority, continues to be a priority in the eyes of the federal government. She's contributed a great deal of money to charter education. I know she contributed a great deal of money to Donald Trump's campaign. So with her being in that slot and looking at what she did in Michigan and her various positions with charter education in Michigan, I see it expanding on a national level.
Well, do you think that there'll still be a Department of Education left by the time she's done?
Wow.
And I say that most sincerely because once upon a time, Ronald Reagan tried to abolish the Department of Education when he assumed office after Carter, which is actually who created it, under the notion that the states could handle educational concerns much better than the federal government or a federal government oversight board could. So since Trump is sort of taking, or President Trump is sort of taking that same approach to sort of decrease the level of federalism and what he would consider to be state-run opportunities, do you think that that's a possibility if, say, Donald Trump's to take on a two-term presidency or even a one-term presidency?
I know that he has mentioned it during the campaign. I see the Department of Education as being vital on the federal level. So all I can do is hope that it doesn't happen. I was posting a lot about that during the campaign and immediately following, and then again on social media again when he appointed or selected Betsy DeVos. But we'll see what happens. I feel strongly that there's a need for a Department of Education.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. We're visiting this evening with Baruti Kafele, better known as Principal Kafele. You know, Principal Kafele, let me ask you that. I know you're real big on reform and the work you've done in New Jersey and around the country in terms of your speaking and bringing some awareness on the issues of the plight of urban education. Walk us back a little bit to I guess when you all started this thing, when other than being starting as a new teacher, what got you so involved with saying that I know the needle has got to move one way or the other on the side, especially when it comes to urban education and black males?
Yeah, when I got into education as a teacher, a fifth grade teacher back in 1988 in Brooklyn, New York City,
wow.
My motivation for getting into the business was very personal. I simply wanted to be in position to teach and model manhood for my boys, and that really was why I got into it. The interesting thing about it is that was at the core of my work back during that time, and then throughout my years as a teacher, and then my 14 years as a principal. So here we are on December 15, 2016, and that's still at my core of why I do this work.
Wow.
But I think a lot of that's because some of the issues that create the need for you to teach and model manhood still exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how important do you think that is to us creating a solid educational system for us to take in some of those virtues and try to teach those as well as the classroom lessons?
If things continue to be as they are now, with the abundance of young men entering schools and not being able to make the distinction between being young males and young men, I really see no hope.
Wow.
That distinction, yeah, I really don't, and I make that very public. There has to be intervention in schools, districts across the country where there's a concentration on helping young men to understand the difference, and that is not done necessarily with school personnel. That's done by tapping into that outside community. See, the way I had done it as a principal, I said the Young Men's Empowerment Program, which is what we called it, we said we're going to make that comparable to math and science. We're not going to put math and science above that. We're going to say this is just as important as proficiency in math and science, English and social studies, etc. So the program was a during the school day program where I had tapped into hundreds of men throughout the city of Newark and the surrounding cities here in Jersey, and we partnered with them, they partnered with us, and they became an integral part of what we did. So we literally sat and watched young men transform, or young males transform into young men as a result of what we were pouring into them on a regular basis.
Principal Kafele, is that the answer? Is that really, can we get a groundswell of men to get into our schools during the day? And I think what you tapped on is something that ought to catch fire, especially in the South. And I say the South because I'm a part of the South, and we have a disproportionate number of young African American males in this area who are missing the boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, they're missing out on life because, number one, they're dropping out, or either they're suspended, and we don't even want to talk about implicit bias that still pervades today. So tell me, how in the world do we get men like a Doc Ward and a DC to get in there and say, look, give me an hour and a half a day or 2 hours a day and come into our schools and help us model these young men?
See, the reason I tapped into so many is because I knew I couldn't get the same guys being able to leave their jobs or whatever it is that they do and spend time at our school. So I said, let me tap into an abundance of them, but let me put together a framework and a curriculum for them to work with us. So on the one hand, we're talking about the young men's development, but then the other piece that corresponds with it is teaching the young men who they are, historically speaking. So at my core, from the very first day I taught up until today, it was teaching them their history, but teaching them who they are as young men. So now, as a trainer, in terms of the work I do now in professional development, I'm literally going into schools talking about this. But I'm telling schools you can invest millions of dollars into these reading and math programs all you want, but as long as this young man is looking into the mirror and not recognizing who that is, looking back from a historical context, you're just spinning your wheels and wasting your dollars.
Wow, you're listening.
You can't connect it to anything.
You're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. This evening we're visiting with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele.
So, Principal Kafele, I have a few questions, but I'll start with, so what does this actually look like? I hear, connecting to a historical understanding of who they are and teaching and modeling manhood, but if you're putting this on your to-do list, right, what are the items that you're checking off?
Yeah, and just as a point of information, this program is also for the young ladies, so young women's empowerment program
Fantastic.
as well. So we haven't forgotten them by any stretch.
That's good to hear.
But in terms of the what does it look like, the to-do list and the how-to, in terms of the model I developed, and schools throughout the country are using the model now, we looked at 5 areas, and I'll focus on the boys for just the sake of time. We looked at 5 areas in particular. We said, it poses 5 questions. What does it look like to be a young man in relationship to himself, his own personal growth and development? What does that look like? What's entailed? What is dedication, commitment, sacrifice, etc. look like? Because I knew in terms of my own principalship that I had a whole school full of young men that did not know, could not answer that question in terms of what does my own personal growth and development look like. And I can't necessarily teach that in a math class, in a science class, in an English class, etc. I needed time away from class to hone in on those areas, but not solely utilizing the efforts of myself and folks who were employed within the school, but again tapping into those men from all walks of life, from the successful CEO and business person, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, the brother who spent 10 years in jail.
That's right, brother. That's right.
The OG,
that's
the
right.
ex-gang member. We wanted him as well, and everybody in between. And however you communicated your language, it didn't matter. We closed the door and you speak to them how you convey your point best.
Wow.
Right. So strand 2, what's it look like to be a young man in relationship to the young lady? We wanted to counter every lyric of commercial hip hop that's out there to make sure that he understands that she's not the definition of a woman that the rapper gives her in the commercial song, but she's a queen. And we spent all those years giving him example after example, conversation after conversation, making him understand that she's not those characteristics that are described in the song. She is much more than that. Strand 3, what does it look like to be a young man in relationship to the children that he may or may not have? We wanted to talk about what fatherhood looked like, even if you're sitting in an elementary school classroom or a middle school classroom. We wanted to begin to plant those seeds now, because he's going home, 80% of them in the typical schools that I worked in, to a household where he's never seen that in action. Mm-hmm. If I want to go to the NBA, as unrealistic as that goal may be, I still have to look at men or women who are great at what they do to model for me what it looks like to be great. Well, if I'm hearing about what fathers do but don't get to see it, then why are you expecting me to evolve into one? So we want to have that conversation over the period of time that youngster's in school with us. Number 4, what does it look like to be a young man in relationship to the other young men? Schools I worked in are gang infested, and the slightest thing could make something jump off. I want them to understand that what binds them together is much bigger than the colors that separate them. So there's another lengthy, years-long conversation. And finally, strand 5, what's it look like to be a man in relationship to his community? And we want to have that conversation and make him understand that he's got to be a pillar in his own community, an asset to that community, not a liability.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. We're visiting this evening with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele. Principal Kafele, that is, if that model can be replicated around the entire country, and I'm assuming when you go around, you speak to a lot of groups in terms of education reform, and is it catching on anywhere? Are people saying, hey, look, can you come and introduce this to, let's say, in the state of Alabama, maybe to the district in Birmingham, or can you introduce this in the district in Memphis, or how is this catching on?
It's catching on big, and I wish it was catching on bigger than it is. I put it in a book. that I had written back in '09 called "Motivating Black Males to Achieve in School and in Life," and there's a whole chapter devoted to the development of the program based on the needs of the particular school. So there were a lot of schools that had begun this program, particularly those diverse and integrated schools. They were able to do it, and what I cautioned them against was stigmatizing their African American males and in using it only for them. I said, for all your boys, and then the component for the girls, implement that, but don't extract them from the rest of the school and just have a program for them, because then it defeats the whole purpose. So it's catching on big. The problem is I got so many other topics that I address that I'm not always invited for that. So I try to weave it into whatever I do. I do a lot with school leadership development. Yeah. So even with that, I still find ways to weave it in there, even though it's not necessarily my topic for being invited.
But a program like this that focuses on personal development and respect for oneself and one's community and members of the opposite sex, the things that actually make a man or a woman and build the virtues. How does that get taught in a manner that's sufficient for kids? Because it's definitely needed. But how does that get taught against this trend of all of these other tests and batteries and things that kids have to take across the country? Because, one of the problems I think we have is that the real lessons of life, which is probably just as important as the academic lesson, does not get taught because all of these acts and these other statutes and regulations require us to teach a curriculum that takes pretty much and consumes pretty much the entire year to get over to the child. So how do you how do you manage to get a curriculum like what you're establishing here successfully implemented in the school to where it's meaningful to students? And is there a need for us to try to move that, take up more time with a curriculum like yours and less time with this, with all these battery of tests, so that we can build the complete student and the complete man and the complete woman?
See, my curriculum makes it easier for a youngster to pass those tests and to do well in class, because what that curriculum does is it literally gives the young man a sense of purpose for being in the building in the first place. I can't expect the youngster to maximize their potential if I don't have a definition of why I'm there in the first place. But when that definition or that purpose is spelled out, and I'm the one that developed it as a result of the information I've received, then it's easier for me to kind of hone in on what a teacher is delivering, and ultimately I do well in class. So what happens is, in terms of that program, a grade level at a time, or depending on the size of the school, is pulled out of class, say on Monday morning for about 3 to 4 hours. They're typically in shirt, tie, slack, shoes, and a belt, because I've sold it on their mother, and mom bought into it and said, whatever it takes. Poverty has never been an issue.
That's right. That's right.
Because the slacks and the shoes don't cost money, and wherever mom comes up short, we supplement. So that's not an issue. And so now they're looking like these mini principles of the school, right? Wow. So, and we call them that, co-principals. And now they're sitting in a cafeteria or a library, whatever the case may be, and we're engaging them for 3 to 4 hours in the morning. We're literally missing class, but we're gonna make that up. But we're engaging them in these very tough, hardcore conversations. They're emotional, because we're hitting at things that they're not necessarily accustomed to talking about in that setting, right? And it's a very powerful experience, not only for them but for us, the adults, as well. We learn a lot from listening to them as they learn a lot from listening to us. And again, they're not subjected to just the school personnel that they're accustomed to hearing from all the time. They're hearing from these brothers that we went out and got, and it makes a difference.
That sounds great. You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazukian Network. We're visiting this evening with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele.
Hey! Got to pay back. Revenge.
This is the story of a great people, of hopes and dreams, of challenge and change. It's an American story. This story and struggle that started many centuries ago lives today in the halls and on the walls of the renovated National Civil Rights Museum. Enter the Supreme Court Halls of Justice, sit with Rosa Parks on the Montgomery bus, hear Mahalia Jackson sing at the March on Washington. Plan now to visit the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. For more information, log on to civilrightsmuseum.org.
In Memphis, there are 116,000 very important young minds. 20,000 of them attend schools in the bottom 5%.
The Memphis Education Fund partners with committed organizations to give these students access to an equitable education.
Their partners work to operate quality schools, recruit, retain, and develop effective teachers and leaders, ensure community voice, and support the needs of the whole child in Shelby County's priority schools.
R&R on Sports with iConversation.
The Executive Director of the NBA Players Association, Ms. Michelle Roberts.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
He is currently Managing Director and Chairman of USA Basketball, Mr. Jerry Colangelo, with us here on R&R on Sports.
Thank you guys. Nice to be with you.
The one, the only, Detlef Shrimp.
Hey, Howard and Larry, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show.
Ken Griffey Jr., how are you today, sir?
I'm good. How about you guys?
Catch iConversation on R&R on Sports, part of the Consultant Network.
This is Terry Freeman, president of the National Civil Rights Museum, originally from the Go-Go capital, D.C. You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Consultant Network.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Consultant Network. You got your guy here, D.C., Doc Ward. Hey, Doc, how you doing?
I'm good. What about yourself?
I don't know. You got that low energy. Like you always.
I never have low energy.
You never have low.
I'm trying. I have to go low to make you seem like you're high.
Wow. Or whatever. We've got a special guest host in the studio this evening, Wendy Thomas, a independent journalist who happens to be a world-renowned journalist, guru of journalism. Hey, Wendy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to have you visiting with us this afternoon. I tell you, right here above the 13th floor.
We have somebody else too.
The 13th suite.
You really are stalling.
I'm not stalling, but today what we have, we've got Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele, a education reform guru who emanates out of the New York, New Jersey area. Welcome to the program, Principal Kafele. How are you, sir?
All right.
Yes, sir. I'm good. Thank you.
Fantastic Four on education. Funky Four or Funky 3+1.
Principal Kafele, I guess I'm the +1, so don't mind this guy here.
I never put a plus in front of you.
We really secretly hate each other. But no, anyway, Principal Kafele, we've had an education series that's been sponsored by. We've had some great sponsors, and we've talking about how do we move the needle a little bit more to the right, a little bit more to the left. How do we increase our outcomes with our young people? And one area that we've talked about a lot is this new administration coming in and what to expect. And I think my colleague Wendy had something she just had to say. She just got to get it out. Get it out, Wendy. Whatever you got to say, say it.
Yes, Principal Kafele, you're the education expert. I'm just a journalist. But reading what Miss Betsy's, can I call her Miss Betsy?
Miss Betsy. Did you call her Miss Betsy? Oh, my God.
No, I'd rather not.
The education secretary nominee, her thoughts about vouchers, it seems, what I've read, she's definitely in support. I'm just curious as to what your take on that is and what that means for public education as a whole.
Yeah, it's a frightening notion. When you ask the question, I'm thinking about me in my capacity of principal when I was, and trying to balance a budget, looking for pennies to try to fund whatever. Right. So now you're talking about a voucher system in that context. Here's a school, XYZ school district, in each kid per pupil expenditures is $15,000. So each kid is worth $15,000 in that vein.
Wow.
So now here, just using round numbers, 10 kids are going to some other school through a voucher, right? So now as a district, we just lost $150,000, right? And that's just 10 kids. So now you look at a situation where 300-400 kids are going to some other school, some other place, some private school, some Catholic school, some charter, or whatever the case may be. Now, back at my school or back in my district, all that money is gone. And the bulk, the overwhelming majority of those kids are still going to be in my school or in that district. But now I've got less money to be able to provide them with a world-class education. So, it's one thing that, folks happy about the kids who have that opportunity to go to this other place is by way of under the umbrella of school choice. But I'm looking at that kid that doesn't have that opportunity, or if there's a voucher where half of that tuition is paid and by the district through the voucher, and the other half is paid by the family, and that family doesn't have that other half, right? So we're talking about a whole lot of kids, children of color, other underserved children, who are going to who will suffer or who have suffered under a voucher system. So that's one of my biggest issues with it.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. This evening, we're visiting with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele.
But that's a concept, though, that's been on the horizon for a very long time. So how does public education respond to it, other than to indicate how much of a compromise it is on the public budget? Because this isn't something that's new at all. We've got to have some type of way to respond to it now, because it's evident that the scenario that you have just outlined is imminent, given the current administration. So what would be a response to public education?
The incoming administration, I would say. Incoming administration. You said current.
The bottom line, and it's not going to be the easiest thing to do, but the bottom line is the product itself. To use a business term, years ago, back in 2003, I took over a school in the summer, July 1st, 2003. July 5th, I got a letter from the State Department indicating that the school was designated as persistently dangerous under No Child Left Behind. It was considered the most dangerous school in northern New Jersey. 5 days after I got there, before and students didn't come back till September, so it wasn't my issue with what I inherited. So now, under the law, the parents could opt out. They could transfer their children to a safer school. So they all wanted out because it was a big New York City media story. In Jersey, we don't have our own media. We rely on New York media. So it was a big New York media story. So everybody wanted out. So I simply brought the parents together in a meeting in August and convinced them that the best place to be was with me. There's no other. There's no better alternative than to be in this school with me, despite what you heard, because the one variable that changed is the new leader. So I'm saying that in the context of the question. I sold the product, the school. I said the school is the best possible option. So a school district, a school or a school district has to be able to convince the public that we are the best option. But then you got to produce, right? So which is a much larger conversation than you guys have time for. But the end of the day, and the work that I do, it's about a school being able to produce, starting with the leadership of that building. I put all the emphasis on the school leadership.
But isn't that an uphill climb? Because if you've got a bunch of kids leaving an area because they're saying that the school is not fit, it's going to be pretty hard for that school to turn around and market itself to sufficiency to allow people to stay. So it's got to be some other way for the public school system. Seeing this come on, like I said, this is coming on real slow because it's been on the horizon for a long time. There's got to be a way for public school systems to hold themselves together in the midst of the fact that they may lose several students or lose their funding rather to other students who may have vouchers and take them to parochial schools or private schools outside of the system.
So let's say, for example, this is a failing school, right? A failing, underperforming, and we can even add the word violence, right, in the building, right? I can't sell that as it is. I can't. If I've got my own kids in that school, I'm not going to opt for a voucher, but I got issues with that school because students are not performing, and it's an unsafe learning environment, right? So now, therefore, there have got to be some monumental changes in that school, and that becomes the selling point. That I have changed the leadership. I put competent leadership in the building, and if I need to change teaching staff, I got to do that too. But I got to make sure, just like using the analogy of sports, those teams that win, one could talk about the best plays and the best this and that, but at the end of the day, it's the talent on the field and it's the talent on the sideline, right? So the leadership. and the folks playing. So it works the same way in schools. I got to have talent in those classrooms, and I got to have talent that's driving the ship.
You are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. In our studio this evening, we're visiting with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele.
So I'm curious if this. We talk about these students going to private schools. Seems like I read something that says there's not even enough space in these private schools to take these students. So logistically, what concerns do you have about, besides, probably the absence of culturally competent or sensitive education, logistically, what concerns do you have?
In terms, because Sean, you asked me two things. In terms of
vouchers,
scarcity of space. Or
well, yeah, that too. That would be one of the logistical areas. But do you see other logistical problems?
Yeah, I mean the space issue is real, because in order to have a place for these kids to go, you've got to take away space or building that, or as so many of these charter organizations do, they share space within a building, and I've seen that model in many places, and it can be quite problematic. When you've got 2 to 3 different principals in a building, with looking at the world 3 different ways or through 3 different lenses, it has an adverse impact on young people. But then when you talk about cultural competency, man, that's a whole nother radio broadcast. I mean,
wow, that's a whole nother network. That's not even a radio. That's a whole different thing.
And see, culturally responsive teaching and learning.
Right.
That's at my core, because that ties in that whole history component. Equity in the classroom. That's at my core.
Right.
How fair is that classroom, that teacher, that school, that district for young people, right? But to what extent, as teacher, do I know these kids historically? Do I know these kids culturally? Do I understand them and not see them as something inferior to me, because I see differences in who they are from what I'm accustomed to within my life? And I spend hours in that conversation with teachers and principals.
Principal Kafele, speaking of cultural differences, I'm big on this new term I really learned or actually picked up as we began this education series, and that was implicit bias. In your opinion, how many generations of young black men have we lost because of implicit bias in the classrooms, just post-integration? And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the fact that maybe I was suspended because I got in a fight with a kid and I bloodied his nose, and they put me out of school. I didn't come back, and I hate to quantify, but how many have we lost, man? And are these the fathers and the grandfathers of the kids that we have in school right now that are having problems?
Yeah, they are. Okay. Sometimes I think implicit bias is worse than overt bias.
Yeah.
Because now I'm doing something that I'm not even conscious of.
Mm.
Right? Just in terms of how I talk to a youngster, or just in terms of placement in a classroom, or how I view this kid, my vision, my belief in this particular kid. Right? My beliefs may be low because of some song I heard, some television show that I saw, some movie I heard, some experience I had on the subway. Whatever the case may be, and now I bring this bias that I'm not even conscious of, and it has far-reaching implications on that kid relative to his or her growth and development in that classroom, relative to the beliefs and the expectations that I have for that kid. It's very deep.
So what did we do before? Because there were kids that had an inferior personality and complex years before we got into this new age of school reform. So how do we handle it before? Because it seems like it's become an issue now. But what took place before when we were seemingly able to conquer that issue?
It's a conversation. Take note of this, and I encourage you guys to research this.
Sure.
Denver, Colorado, Denver Public Schools, their superintendent declared, there's a white superintendent in Denver, he declared that they practice institutional racism. Declared. So now what he did was created a department of culture and equity and leadership. And they decided we're going to address this head on. They brought me to Denver last week to talk to the community and to talk to the educators about equity. I presented this workshop called "Just Level the Playing Field and Watch What I Do," meaning from the student. And the big thing about it is, it's one thing to look at a district, look at a school, and say, "Wow, institutional racism abounds." But it's another thing when the superintendent says, "We're guilty, so now we want to do something about it." So for those that are aware, because a lot of people are not aware of this, but for those who are, all eyes on Denver to see what it is that they're going to do to address it. So they hired this brother who's from Denver, but he served as a deputy superintendent in Charlotte and in Oakland, and they brought him back home to head this department. So he's bringing in a lot of heavyweight speakers and presenters and trainers, and they got all this other PD, this professional development they're putting in place, and they're addressing this thing head on. And I'm expecting to see some big things happen because they're taking the bull by the horn.
Wow. Well, I guess the other thing is, though, as it relates to, and I got to go back to this because we're talking about vouchers and a number of things. Is there an opportunity for some public-private partnership development in black communities and places where public schools are prevalent in order to allow them to be able to level the playing field in this oncoming prediction of the prominence of vouchers? Because every major city in America right now that I see is experiencing an uptick in murders and in crime overall. And it's not because of just the kids that are in school or not in school. It's the community's issue. So I would think that the community, either private small business in the community, the churches that are in the community, civic organizations, and the school could form an effective partnership in order to save the school. Because after all, they all share the mutual interest of the community being safe and productive. So, I mean, where do you see the role of the overall community in terms of those entities, the private entities? Where do you see their importance? And how do we get them on board to assist in developing and building these neighborhoods back so that the schools can be supported by their growth and development?
Yeah, well, I mean, folks been saying all along that the community has to play a role, and particularly, there's always a lot of emphasis on the religious community, the churches, etc., mosques, masjids. But the problem is that consciousness that you're referring to has to be there in order for that effort to occur in mass. If that consciousness is not there, that we who are not necessarily connected to a school district, but have a role to play nevertheless, if that consciousness is not there, then we're where we are right now. It doesn't get done. You've got these small segments of people within a population who are your movers and shakers who are trying to make things happen. But again, there's got to be a broader consciousness, and it goes back to what I said from the outset. That's my role. That's in my core. I'm trying to develop that consciousness, and I'm not solely trying to get kids to pass standardized tests and graduate from school and go to college.
Yep.
I'm trying to build a consciousness. And that comes by way of infusing that whole history and culture component.
You're listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazuki Network. In the studio this evening, we're visiting with Baruti Kafele, otherwise known as Principal Kafele.
This is the story of a great people, of hopes and dreams, of challenge and change. It's an American story. The story and struggle that started many centuries ago lives today in the halls and on the walls of the renovated National Civil Rights Museum. Enter the Supreme Court Halls of Justice, sit with Rosa Parks on the Montgomery bus, hear Mahalia Jackson sing at the March on Washington. Plan now to visit the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. For more information, log on to civilrightsmuseum.org.
In Memphis, there are 116,000 very important young minds. 20,000 of them attend schools in the bottom 5%.
The Memphis Education Fund partners with committed organizations to give these students access to an equitable education.
Their partners work to operate quality schools, recruit, retain, and develop effective teachers and leaders, ensure community voice, and support the needs of the whole child in Shelby County's priority schools.
Blues in the Basement live interviews from some of the biggest blues artists in the country.
Bobby Rush.
Wonderful. May God bless you all. All right.
People keep asking me to sing about a good man.
Blues in the Basement. Stay up to date with the biggest blues festivals in the world. Blues in the Basement. Now podcasting and available on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and IG. And download the Blues in the Basement app.
I mean, this music just makes for a good time. All I need is a beer and some babacoo.
And some babacoo.
Blues in the Basement. In the Basement. In the Basement. In the Basement. In the Basement.
Hit it. Oh, how you feel, brother? Feeling good. You feel good? Feeling good. It's groovy. Play so much bone, brother. How you feel, man? I feel all right. Now call your name.
I am Willie W. Harrington. I am very passionate about educational empowerment and economic empowerment for African American people. And you are listening to Funky Politics, powered by the Kazukian Network.
Funky Politics Education Reform Series is presented by the National Civil Rights Museum, sponsored by Memphis Education Fund and Southwest Tennessee Community College. We'd like to thank our media partner, Chalkbeat Tennessee.
This is Terry Freeman.
Jim Strickland.
Dorsey Hobson.
I'm DeAndre Brown.
Elisa Househalter.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics Show.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Y'all better keep listening.
Funky Politics, part of the Katsukian Network.
How we